Okay, welcome everyone. It's great to see you if I could actually see you. But, welcome. I'm Ann Russo and I'm the director of DePaul's Women's Center and a professor of Women's and Gender Studies. And Kendall, thank you very much. Kendall Rollins is going to drop a link to the Women's Center newsletter so you can check it out and find out about other things that are going on at DePaul through the Women's Center. I'm very honored to welcome you to this event tonight with Love and Protect, an organization that provides support and care for women and gender nonconforming, non-binary people of color who are criminalized or harmed by state and interpersonal violence. The support they provide includes letter writing events like tonight, as well as teach-ins, letter writing campaigns, court support, Twitter town halls, and general awareness. And I'm always deeply appreciative of the opportunity to work with them and to have them come to DePaul. So thank you all very much. While DePaul is hosting this event, the Women's Center, it's part of a larger series of events organized by Love and Protect, the Prison and Neighborhood Arts Education Project, Northeastern Illinois University's non-traditional degree program, as well as DePaul's Students Against Incarceration, the Building Communities Ending Violence Project, and it's also supported by DePaul's Center for Black Diaspora, the Egan Office for Urban Education and Community Partnerships, and the Peace, Justice, and Conflict Studies program. And we like to think of ourselves as a cross-town collaboration. Our goals for this collaboration are to offer monthly writing spaces where we gather to write to incarcerated survivors of violence. Also really interested in building more awareness and expanding who's involved in this work, and to contribute to the freedom work of Love and Protect and other abolitionist groups in Chicago. So the next letter writing event will be on March 8th, which is International Women's Day. So after this event, tomorrow or the next day, you'll receive another email, and that will give you the Eventbrite links to that event. Following that event in March 8th, there'll be another event on Tuesday, April 5th. So mark your calendars. The event is Organizing Towards Survival, Survivor Activism Behind and Beyond Bars. This promises to be an extraordinary event centering formerly incarcerated survivors in conversation with one another about the activism they led while they were incarcerated, their experiences of inside-outside organizing, and their current organizing projects. I think we can learn so much from their leadership and perspective, and I'm excited to see how I hope that we'll continue to build this collaboration in our abolitionist work at DePaul. So stay tuned with DePaul's Women's Center to learn more about these upcoming events and how to get involved. So tonight, for the letter writing, we're joined by Sarah G. Ree and Rachel Kydor, who will be leading our session. So I just want to offer an introduction to them. I'm so excited. I appreciate and love both of them, and I'm happy to have them here. So Sarah G. Ree is a mother, abolitionist organizer, and photographer who documents freedom struggles in Chicago under the name of Love and Struggle Photos. Check out her Instagram Linktree. And again, thank you, Kendall, who will drop the link, and also her website. Her photography is, really an amazing and powerful living archive of the important, challenging, and transformative abolitionist organizing that's happening in Chicago and beyond. Sarah G. Ree is also a 1995 graduate of DePaul University. That's very exciting as well. Rachel Kydor is an abolitionist feminist and a proud member of Love and Protect. In her quote unquote free time, she also works with the Just Practice Collaborative, supporting movement groups addressing sexual and interpersonal violence through community accountability processes. She's been in Chicago's anti-violence field since 1997, working as, among many other things, a legal advocate, the coordinator of the Chicago Rape Crisis Hotline, an assistant director of UIC's Campus Advocacy Network, and as the director of the Illinois Domestic Violence Hotline. She's currently a program officer at Third Wave Fund, where she gets to support radical youth-led organizations advancing gender justice. So I hope you will all join me in welcoming Sarah G. and Rachel. So if you could somehow communicate that you're very excited to welcome them.
All right.
To Sarah.
Okay. So I'm going to kick it off, and I want to just take a little bit of a temperature and vibes check. If you are happen to be near a computer, feel free to drop things in the chat. But like I want to make sure that everyone's access needs are met. Like I know those of you who have masks on or having trouble breathing, like may have trouble breathing. So please feel free to like step out, like find an alcove, take a deep breath. I won't take it personally if everybody leaves the presentation at the same time. And also, if I'm talking too fast, please like signal and so that I can get a signal so that I can slow down. And if I say anything that is if when I say something that's utterly confusing because I'm a human, please feel free to signal and then sort of like ask for clarification. I'm trying to make sure that we build in a little bit of time for us to talk amongst each other, because I know that for some of you, you've done these events before and you have some familiarity with the work. And then there's others of us who don't have familiarity of the work. So like as much as possible, I'd love for this to be more conversational, more dialogical, and then there's going to be letter writing at the end. A couple of things about process too. I am going to assume best intentions, but I am also the child of Haitian immigrants who believed everybody was out to get them. So like, please feel free to ask questions, but also be prepared for me to ask clarifying questions. And if someone asks a question and somebody else in the room actually has that knowledge, like I am really invested in making sure this is a peer-based space. So if you feel comfortable, like please sort of like signal that you've got a contribution, and then feel free to do that as well. And finally, we are going to, I believe in breaks, right? And so we're building in a solid break, like a formal break between the content part and the letter writing instructional part. That's going to be a few minutes, like enough for stretching, enough to go to the water fountain. But if you need to take a bio break, or we're going to be talking a little bit about like domestic and sexual violence, and you feel overwhelmed by that material, and we're talking about state violence and its horrors. So if you feel overwhelmed by that material, please feel free to take space for yourself and like, like do what you need to do to take care of yourself. I may not be able to, like, I can't see everybody. So it's going to be really hard for me to do a vibes watch. So also vibes watch each other, and drop in the chat. If you happen to have a computer and you want to drop something in the chat, like a question, etc., I would love that. And is that helpful? Are there any other things we want to make sure is the vibe of this space before I carry on with the One Ring Circus that is Rachel Kydor? All right, cool. I see Elizabeth. I see some hands, some thumbs up. All right, so can we go to the welcome slide, Sarah? There you go. So like our goal for this time together is for y'all to learn a little bit about love and protect, because that's what we're here for. And we're going to also talk a little bit about criminalizations of survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault, which means we're going to talk a little bit about the nature of those harms. Also, we want to talk about mainly the importance of building community with incarcerated people, and also taking leadership from incarcerated people, and how we can do that through correspondence. like specifically. And finally, we're going to like learn a little bit more about a few cases that are sort of like on top of mind for Love and Protect right now, because a couple of our friends are very close to trying to get out, and we want to do as much support of that as possible. Is that cool? Is there anything else you want us to touch on in this hour? Like problem solving, all the problems of the universe, romantic advice. What are you going to wear tomorrow? Okay. I can't help you with that because I wear the same thing every day. Okay. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Love and Protect. Sarah, can we have the next slide? How many of you, show of hands or emoji, have heard of Love and Protect or interacted with us? I see a couple, 2, 3, couple, 2, 3. I see some hearts. I see a 5. I see 5 thumbs up and a heart, 2 hearts, 3 hearts. I feel like this is what people who play the stock market and see their money going up and up and up feel like. So, all right. So there's a fair amount of you who know about Love and Protect. I'm going to give a little bit of a wrap about what we do. And if I miss anything, shout it out at the end. I'll give you the time. So Love and Protect we are a volunteer collective. We are a small and mighty group of like 9 to 10 people. And what we do is we provide direct support to women and gender nonconforming, gender expansive people of color who have been criminalized for self-defense. And we're going to dig deep about what this criminalization means. And we also work to raise awareness about this, because part of what birthed Love and Protect is this realization that people aren't talking about the fact that a lot of people who are incarcerated are survivors of like the harms that a lot of other people think people should be incarcerated for. And we also noticed that there was a very gendered way of talking about abolition, because we work in an abolitionist framework, and that includes sort of like combating everything from prisons and jail to ICE to involuntary mental health detention to electronic monitoring to forcing people into rehab. The prison industrial complex has many, many tentacles. And we come from an abolitionist perspective, meaning we want to dismantle those things and build a better world. We want to understand that these institutions actually cause the very violence they pretend to interrupt, right? And then in causing that violence, it's our duty to try to repair, like address that harm. And finally, we feel like one of the big charges for Love and Protect, because a lot of us are also social work refugees, is reimagining the relationship we have with people who have experienced violence and need support, right? Like we want to figure out solutions for addressing interpersonal harm, interrupting interpersonal harm, and like preventing interpersonal harm that doesn't rely on violence, right? We believe violence, i.e. policing the state, et cetera, doesn't solve violence, i.e. sexual assault, domestic violence. And that's why we all came together as Love and Protect. Next slide, please, Sarah. So like what was super alarming for us is that we were standing on the intersection of several trends, right? Like since the like 80s and 90s, we've seen an exponential increase of women being incarcerated. What we also know about this group of people is that overwhelmingly, like I'm talking like 80%, I'm talking the grade you want in your math class because it means you've passed the test. Like overwhelmingly, these women have been also like survivors of violence at the hands of the state, their partners, and like people close to them. And we also realized that a lot of the people who were inside were either inside for like survival crimes that they were doing, not only to survive the violence that they were experiencing in, but like also they were they're like survival crimes, like, you know, writing bad checks, you know, selling narcotics, you know, shoplifting, things like that, but also crimes for self-defense. And we're going to talk about that in a minute, because we really wanted to focus on the impact of domestic violence and sexual violence on survivors. Now, Sarah, can we see the next slide? It's now audience participation time. Like, how, if you all want to shout out or put in the chat, or shout to Anne so she can put in the chat, like, how do people talk about domestic violence in your life? Like, what have you heard about it? What are some depictions you've seen out in the world? Like, what is domestic violence or sexual violence to you? Shout it out. It is a lot. And thank you, Avital. I hope I've pronounced it right. Like, there is,
right.
What? That's it?
Oh, yeah. So I said that was right.
Awesome. Like, do you want to give an example, like shout out a name or like a story that you've heard?
Well, I guess, I don't know, a lot of people, I feel like my age probably watch Euphoria, which
Oh,
is a TV show that's like, sometimes it has, or it depicts things like domestic or sexual violence. So like some people don't watch it because that makes them uncomfortable because it's like in that. So I don't know, things like that.
oh my God. Stay tuned for an extra 2 hours after this so we can talk about Euphoria, because I need to process. Right. Like, I think Euphoria is a really excellent example because it shows the sort of like psychological part and the physical part of how both of these kinds of harm like exist for people. And like, people are very often surprised where I'm like, this teen drama does a lot better depiction of domestic and sexual violence than, say, Law and Order, SVU, which is the bane of my existence. And Layla put in the chat that there's lots of victim blaming, and, you know, like, there's lots of victim blaming. So what does the victim blaming sound like? Anybody chime in?
If you have examples that you want to have in the chat, provide that.
Yeah. You made me do it. She asked for it, right? What else? These are really excellent. The victim should have done more to get help. Hannah, it's like, you are in my PowerPoint mind and I'm here for you. You can actually take over from here. Anybody else? Right? Like, I love all these answers. Thank you so much. Why doesn't she just leave? She asked for it. Those are the messages that we hear about like survivors of domestic violence. What people don't know about domestic violence is that domestic violence, and often like sexual violence, like people act like sexual violence is a one-time thing, but there's sometimes a pattern. Like, it relies on power and control, and it's about power and control. And it's about using multiple tools to exact, control over someone, so that like when the violence happens, that's kind of the tip of the iceberg for a lot of people. And Lil added that like survivors learn how to tolerate extreme levels of trauma, right? So people do what they need to survive in the situation. And I want to call back Hannah's contribution. Like, the victim should have done more to get support. Now, I'm going to go ahead and date myself. like when I was a kid, the only time, oh, and only men to women. Yes, Anne. Like the only time you saw a story about domestic violence was like The Burning Bed, where Ferris Fawcett like set fire to her abuser. And sort of an updated version of this is that movie J-Lo, like J-Lo's movie Enough, right? And then like in the world of Law and Order, everybody's waiting for Olivia Benson to come in and like do what's right for the survivor. What we know though is that more often than not, and especially when the survivor is not a quote unquote ideal victim, meaning like a Black person, a person who's poor, a person who's queer, a person who's gender nonconforming, a person who's perceived of as an aggressive person, right? Like what we see in those cases more often than not is that those people then get turned into the harm doers, right? And then they get prosecuted. And Sarah, can we go to the next slide? Ooh, okay, yes, criminalized survivor. So like, and this is why we focus on criminalized survivors. Like I said earlier, over 80% of the people, I'm gonna put the coffee down because I'm hyped. Over 80% of people who identify as women or who were born women and quote unquote women and put into systems, like it's almost universal that they've experienced harm. And what we see is that survivors who defend themselves physically, and then the person who is harming them ends up dying in the course of that defense, are prosecuted really, really intensely. In the same way that people who are parents of children and their partner is also abusing the children get locked up under failure to protect laws in this state specifically and across the country, where they are in effect being incarcerated for not being able to like narrow their abuser's impact only on their bodies, right? And then like there are also survival strategies for people who are in abusive relationships where their abuser controls the money, their abusers control their bodies. So they are doing things that are illegal that people need to survive. And they're often the easiest to prosecute because they're the ones in the front line, right? And there is, of course, racism, sexism, heterosexism, transphobia, homophobia, ableism, all caught up in this, right? Like, and when I talk about ableism, everything from like this person is quote unquote schizophrenic or something, or they have a mental health issue and therefore they're inherently violent, to things like a lot of survivors of domestic violence have experienced traumatic brain injuries, which actually impacts your ability to make like your decision-making ability. Like it's a biological fact. And like trauma makes you remember things differently. It's a biological fact. And very often it's like it makes them unideal victims. And so that's why we decided to focus on criminalized survivors. We also realized through the help of one of our like radical leaders who is a survivor of both like sexual and domestic violence, but also a survivor of the prison industrial complex, Monica Cosby, that the way prison works exactly like to a T mimics how abusers work, right? So Sarah, can we see the next two slides? So like if you have quote unquote free time, Monica, Beth Ritchie and I had a really, what I think a beautiful conversation because of those two geniuses about how prison mimics, like prison replicates the cycle of abuse that a lot of survivors face. So if you go to the next slide, we have a handy dandy like model, right? And so how many of you have ever seen the power and control wheel? Why am I looking as if I can see? It's like I see a hand, like a couple, two, three, I see. All right. So the power and control wheel was developed to really lay out how abuse works. In this modified version, it really brings the point home that the same things that abusers use, sexual violence, like an abuser will use rape and the prison industrial complex will use a strip search, right? Isolation, like abusers are like, I'm going to move you to a suburb that nobody ever heard of. And the prison industrial complex is going to move you 500 miles away from your kids. Like it's almost a point by point replication of abuse. And what it does is tell survivors that they are invisible, nobody cares about them, and that anything can happen to them while they're incarcerated and nobody fucking cares, right? Sorry, I'm proud that I got 29 minutes into this without cursing. So everybody shout me out for that, lift me up. So prison and abuse like look exactly the same, which is part of why Love and Protect is really committed to doing this support work in a way that's not like your typical nonprofit where we're going to tell you what your problem is and give you 20 sessions of therapy and then send you on your way. What we understand is that in order to combat power and control, one of the main things that you have to do is like address the systems and then also like empower, like work with the survivors as peers, not as like service workers. That was a lot. Do people have questions about that? Lily, yes, you're right. It's super upsetting. And I promise you, almost everybody at Love and Protect has a lot of sleep issues because we be stressed. It's very, very upsetting. And I don't want to embarrass anybody, but I think that some really like a really hopeful insight into like how to address this problem is a little text that I found useful in my work called Feminist Accountability. That you may or may not have heard of the author, but like I think that the work that Anne Russo does, the work that Beth Ritchie does, and like other abolitionists who actually come out of DV work are able to like both provide a comprehensive view of how fucked up this is, but also give you sort of like little peaks of like strategies that people are taking to combat. Do people have like questions? Is everybody bummed out, devastated? Thoughts about domestic violence and the increase of women in prison? If you're raising your hand, I can't see you, so just shut up. All right, I'm gonna take it as a cue to move on. So number 9, can I see slide 9, Sarah? Right. So like I was saying earlier, Love and Protect's model of support is really, really different. Oh yes, Grace, there is a way you can get this diagram. I will make sure that we drop the like image in the chat. And also if you go to the video, and the video is like excellent. Like if you go to the video, Monica and Beth actually take time to go through it all in a way that just reading it like doesn't do it justice. Like I love this image, but hearing Monica especially talk about it will do it justice. Sorry. Oh, hey, Grace. Okay. So like part of what we as Love and Protect, like knowing all of this, like we've decided to model our organization or our collaborative or our collective in a different way, right? So we do survivor-centered support models, meaning like the people we support are incarcerated or pre-trial. And we are not like, we don't show up to their doorstep and just like say like, hey, deal with us, right? And here are the conditions under which you have to deal with us. What we do is we know that everyone's a survivor, and we know that if you are in prison and you've survived abuse, you probably have a lot of experience in not being able to choose who you do and do not interact with. So our initial conversations with people are very like, hey, I got your name from your lawyer, or hey, I was at an event and like your story really, really moved me. Would you like to be a pen pal? Would you like pen pals? And we also provide direct material support to people, meaning we put money on people's commissary. And let me tell you, in prison, you get paid 4 cents a day for working 8 hours sometimes. And let me tell you, you have to buy a ramen for $1, and like you will have to work a month to get enough money to buy a ramen. And we're in prison, right? Like does not provide people enough like hygiene products, especially if they're menstruating, does not provide people like if your shoe wears out and it's not time to give out shoes, you are walking around with worn out shoes. You cannot like, you have to buy your own soap. You have to buy your own toothpaste. You have to buy credits if you want to talk on the phone with your family, or if you want to email with your family. So being in prison is ironically really expensive, because for people who use prison labor, it's literally the cheapest labor. So they're like, prisons are making a profit not only by extracting people's labor, but by upcharging in commissary. Love and Protect is really committed to lowering that barrier. So we just give people fucking cash, right? Like we don't care what you use your cash on. If you want to use your cash to get your hair did every week, go ahead and floss on all these fools. Like if you want to buy all the ramen, buy all the ramen. Like we don't care. And if you want to take money, if you want to accept money, and you don't want to be friends with us because low key, some of us are a little bit chaotic and annoying, right? Like you don't have to be, right? And this is a really different model, especially those of you who are doing social work as your praxis. Like it's a really, really different model than what most social work organizations do. And that's why we're not a social work organization. And we also like help people like have a space where we see them as survivors, and we feel free to talk about them as survivors, but also give them an opportunity to relate to us as not only as people who are inside, right? So like when we do pen pal stuff, like half the time, like I talk to my pen pals, like it's so fucked up that you're inside, but also let me tell you what the Kardashians are doing. Kanye has lost his damn mind. You know what I mean? I don't mean to use that ableist term. And I think that this is a really important part of letter writing, because none of us is the totality of the fucked up situation that we're in, right? And none of us is the totality of the harm that was done to us. And it doesn't serve survivors to keep them frozen in that place, right? So we provide like if people have legal needs, we try to connect them with badass lawyers. Like if they have safety needs and they're outside, we try to help them with that. But one of the key safety needs that we try to address is by keeping like them aware and the people inside prison aware that there are people watching the prison and watching for like how these survivors are being treated inside. All right, does that make sense to people? Do people have questions? Have you seen people work this? Do I see a hand up in the way back, or is that stretching?
Go ahead.
Break it down.
It's more of a comment. I really
Yeah.
appreciate how Love and Protect doesn't have any sort of like stipulations on what money can be used on, because money, especially when it comes from the government, like, and also if you're a survivor of like financial abuse, it could be. I can imagine it could be very not fun. So I just wanted to say I really think that's important to give that autonomy, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. I think like we really struggled around it, and I want to be really transparent that like Love and Protect, like we are all a bunch of humans, right? And so like there are a couple of people who we support pre-trial, and like we also provide them direct material support. So if Janice needs to go to Costco, we're taking Janice to Costco. And if Janice wants to buy Janice did not want to buy, but if Janice wants to buy the extra large thing of gin, what the fuck do I have to say? Like, we don't care, right? Because what we also know is important for survivors is not taking away their coping mechanisms and not taking away the things that make them actual human beings, right? And sort of like once I applied for a job at DePaul that I didn't get, and I suspect it was because it is my dream that everyone can be as mediocre and regular ass and not normal as possible as they want to be, because we don't want to get into these things where we're asking people to be ideal survivors. So it's I think that is also one of the things I love the most about a Love and Protects model, because also I'm not trying to check for you that way. I have a lot of, I don't want to judge regular people. I'm out here judging Kanye, so it's fine. Does anyone else have like any questions, thoughts, or comments? All right. So Sarah, do you want to like a key, like I said, like letter writing as abolitionist practice. So let's go to that slide, Sarah. Now we're going to get to the meat or the tofu, as I would have it, of like why we're all here, right? And letter writing as abolitionist praxis is really, really important to Love and Protect. And like letter writing to people who are incarcerated is a very life-changing experience. Like if you do it once, or if you decide to form a relationship with someone. I, for example, I started writing someone when I first moved to the Midwest, and I was like 17. And like this person was a political prisoner. And this person, like we had a full, very, very active relationship. And he is out now. And it completely changed my perspective, because I came to that letter writing experience as like, I went to Catholic school my whole life, and I'm like leadership through service, whatever Franciscans raised me. And I was like, let me help this person, sort of like, let me be helpful and reduce this person isolation. When like the first letter I got back from Zolo was like, what are you doing for the revolution? Have you read this book? Like, what do you think you're about? Blah, blah, blah. I'm gonna call you collect and then give you a full Marxist lecture, right? And it really changed my life. I'm not saying that's gonna happen to you, but I think that that's part of the like mutual liberatory potential of writing letters. And like we hear from Ruthie Wilson Gilmore a lot that and Angela Davis, like prisons don't disappear problems, they disappear people, right? And all of you have been in like DePaul long enough to know that like when a group of people is isolated and invisibilized, that is when they are the most vulnerable to violence, right? Like that is what happened. Like that's why you make a ghetto in the Holocaust. That's why you round people up in prison, because once people are invisibilized, it's fair game. And so we do this because we want to minimize this isolation. We also know that this is an abuser tactic, right? Like the more somebody is disconnected from their support system, the more controlled they can be, right? And so we want to minimize that isolation. We also helps, like it really helps people start practicing how to have peer-based relationships that are rooted in a sense of shared community. A lot of the people that we work with, like work with is not the right word, a lot of the people that we are friends with are also people who have been through a grillion social work programs, who may or may not have been justice involved before. And there's always strings attached and ways to act in those relationships. And what we want to do in the way that we deal with, like the way that we work with survivors, is be like, you don't have to pretend to be anything else but who you are, right? So like love and protect. We have a friend and her name is Patricia, and she's hilarious because like she is like the most unapologetic person. She is ready to like talk shit about everybody in the jail. And when she was outside, she's like, oh yeah, like I had this date and you better believe I took his wallet, you know, like unapologetic about who she is because she feels comfortable having that relationship. Like, I'm not here to rehabilitate anybody. I'm here to be like, yeah, girl, and I hope you keyed his car because he probably was a terrible date, right? And like, you can't put that in a letter. We'll talk about that later. But like, it helps people build relationships because our sincere belief at Love and Protect too is that we're going to get as many people out as possible. And like the ways that prison teaches you how to shrink yourself, teaches you how to be under control is like, it's soul killing, but it also makes you extra vulnerable for re-prosecution on the outside. And what we want to do is like be a space where people know that they don't have to be that way, right? And so finally, like one of the most important things that happens inside is mail call, right? And we're going to watch a little bit of a video about this in a minute, but mail call signals to both the survivor and everyone else on the block and the corrections officer that this person is not isolated. And so like when you're thinking about it in terms of a domestic violence relationship, it's like I tried to make it so you and your homegirl and never talk again because she's not with you, but the homegirl keeps showing up. And then we're gonna put your name in a different as a different name in your phone, but we're still going to be texting, right? I'm still here for you. Because what we know about abuse is that it's cyclical, right? And then people burn out their support systems. And especially those of us who are writing people who are in for life, people fall off. Like the first year, like everybody's writing you. The second year, like maybe just Valentine's and Christmas and Easter. And by the time you're in there for the 15th year, like nobody is writing you and you feel isolated. People fall off. And what we want to do is minimize that. And we also want these CEOs, I can't stress this enough, like we want the CEOs to know that this person is not alone. And if something is going wrong with them or they're experiencing harm, someone's checking for that. And this is a system like the prison industrial complex goes largely unaccountable. So we wanna know somebody's checking for you, boo, as we say in meme culture. So it's kind of ridiculous. Next time we're gonna schedule this for the morning because I'm slightly more coherent in the morning, ever so slightly. Sarah, can we do the freedom work? So like some of you have been to Love and Protect events. And like some of you have been to Love and Protect events, like, or some of you have like seen or heard about people writing. Like, what has that felt like, been like? What feels weird about it? What feels challenging? Lay it on me. I'm gonna mute myself so that everybody's forced to talk.
I can say something.
like for me, it's difficult because like I grew up low income and in like a difficult neighborhood. So, but being here in a PhD program, I feel like a sense of guilt and almost like, you know, shame about like where I am now. And like comparing that to somebody who's in prison is like, it's difficult, you know, like brings a lot of that up.
Oh, that's so real. Thank you for sharing that, because I think that that's really, really real, right? Like there is this, like, I think that I don't want to project, but what you're describing is survivor's guilt, right? Like we have we have we have this, like, we, like, our lives are still hard, but at least we're not here. And the more people that you know who were so vulnerable to getting caught up in the system, I completely relate about the, like, also the class stuff. And I have so many incarcerated relatives, and like, why them, not me? And is it going to make them feel bad that I'm like, oh, today I went to the Whole Foods and got a brownie, you know what I mean? Like I think that that's a really real thing. And I think that owning that and sort of like recognizing that most of the time, like people who are on the inside actually want us to survive, right? Like they want us to thrive, right? Like like I think that what, like what people really want to hear about is the world, like is the potential for a world that could be like them. And there are hella people incarcerated trying to get their PhD. Like our friend Sandra Brown, who's like the only person I put myself completely on mute for, because she's a genius and I don't want to look like a dumbass in front of her. Like she is getting her PhD partially through being in the system. And so like there are a lot of ways to connect with people around that work, right? Like my friend Debraca's kid is like had her first year in college, and Debraca just like loves talking about how like it was really hard for Cheyenne and she really did it. And oh my God, she had to take this class at 8 a.m. and it's philosophy. Can you believe they make people take philosophy at 8 a.m? So like I think that the things that we worry about people on the inside feeling bad about us is like our own stuff to work out. And it's not bad, because let me tell you, survivor's guilt is real, and I blame capitalism. That's not your fault. That's not your fault. And also, like Grace put in the chat something that's really, really important that we're all going to engage in a minute, which is that like the restrictions around what you can and cannot write or do as you connect with people inside are like, they make no logical sense. And Ches, who is one of our collective members, like said this the other day, and it like I kind of need to get it put on a poster because it's so brilliant, is that the point of prison is to defy logic. Like there is no logic in prison. Like and if you think about the dynamic of prison and the dynamic of like domestic abuse, like that tracks, right? Like in the same way, an abuser will like explode into violence because the rice is burnt, right? Like who the fuck cares the rice is burnt? Nobody, like the rice being burnt is not actually something that warrants beating somebody's ass, but like it's about a defiance of logic. And these restrictions are created arbitrarily because they want to put as many barriers to connection as possible, right? So the logic of it is, there is a logic to it, which is like, we're going to make it almost impossible for these connections to be made, which is why it's even more important for us to engage those like that work, right? Sarah, can we go to the next slide? So like, I can ramble on like Led Zeppelin, ad infinitum. But I want you to hear from Sherelle Baldwin, who was an incarcerated survivor, who um, who like her articulation of the importance of writing, like, is better than I can say. So Sarah, if you can press the play and you can share your sound, right? Is your sound bumping, kicking, whatever it is the word is?
Sorry, I couldn't find the unmute button. Yeah, I think I'm sharing sound. So is the video embedded in the presentation?
Yes, I believe you can just click it. And it's going to take you to a page possibly. And then
Okay, I see it now. I have
Yeah.
to bring it over. Okay, because it's on, here we go.
There you go. And then there she is.
Because you did everything, you took all the right steps. You called the police. You got away from that person. And it's just, what are you supposed to do? Just to keep allowing it to keep happening? They show up at your job. They get you fired from your job. You clear out your bank account. It's just, you know, you don't have nothing left. So how do you survive? Then I started getting all these letters. My mom told me that I got some letters from people on the outside. And I'm like, who are these people? I'm sitting here, I'm so emotional, I'm always crying. So I'm sitting here on the phone crying. Who are these people sending me letters? And she's like, Holly and Stacy, she's naming people. And I'm like, who? She's like, they're from Chicago and California. And I'm like, and then I started getting the letters. And I'm like, who are these people writing me? And I'm like, these people don't care about me. And then, you know, you guys actually did care about me. And that's what kept me from committing suicide. Because 3 years is a long time to be incarcerated and not be with your son. And he's back and forth between houses. And it's just, you know, if my mom didn't fight for me, I don't know where I would be right now. And you guys fighting for me, oh my God. I just think about it every day because I'm like, you know, I seen the petition when I got out. And I'm like, really? There's people that actually seen my case. You know, you think people don't care about you, but people actually do care. People go through similar situations.
Thank you, Sarah. And can we go back to the slide that just has her face on it? How are people feeling after that? Who's crying? Who's crying on the inside? Yeah, it is difficult to hold. Thank you. It is. It is. It's totally a radical act. Like in the chat, we're seeing like that's difficult to hold, right? Because you're like, you can almost in your heart, like it feels like somebody's gripping your heart and like reminding you of the pain that being incarcerated causes. And I hear that. And I thank you all for like staying with me. I should have, I apologize for not giving you a content warning. And I do think, Grace, like communication and care is a radical act. Thank you. And like people really minimize what freedom work looks like. Everyone thinks freedom work is like the protest. Everyone thinks the freedom work is like breaking Assata out of jail. Like everybody thinks the freedom work is like even the clemency petition. But the freedom work is actually the care work, right? And care work is labor, and care work is love. And I don't think it's important. I think it's important not to minimize either. And like, Anne, you're right. Like the pain of incarceration, like it's one of those things where if people have spent a long time feeling uncared for, what the emotion that brings out, like the emotion of a gesture of care brings out for them, opens the floodgates, right? And, you know, like we need those floodgates to open. We need people to be able to start working through like having a life of, like someone said earlier, tolerating incredible amounts of trauma, because it's our hope that when people get out, we can help them move past that survival brain and like move beyond survival into like thriving. And the way you do that is knowing how to give and receive care, right? And so this is as much like about their liberation as it is like creating a world that we all get to live in as like people who are survivors trying to make ourselves a little bit whole. Like what else did that bring up for people? What it brought up to me is that I think we need a break, right? So I'm gonna do let's do like is 5 minutes seem too long, or do we want to do 3 minutes?
I think 5.
All right, let's do a 5-minute break. I'm going to kill all the flies that live in my plants. We're gonna do a 5-minute break, and then we're gonna do just like a really short tutorial on how to write letters, and then we're gonna write. And if you're not ready to write, that's cool. We can do a little bit of Q&A in the chat. You know, like I want to keep, like we're gonna have a playlist, so like I want to give everybody warning, like we're gonna play some music. It's gonna be liberatory, but if it's overstimulating for you all, please like let us know in the chat, and we'll figure out a different way for people to have like a different sensory experience as we're in this place, right? So it's 7 o'clock now. Please come back at 7:05, and then we're gonna write, right? And if you're on break and you have questions,